Hey, everybody. I see some familiar faces. Quite a few, actually. The benefit of being on the gallery view, if you're not already on gallery view, you can see everyone that's here. And then if you prefer speaker view, when Spencer and I are speaking, which I probably should set it as, so we come forward more. In fact, we can try it a little bit both ways and see how it goes. But if you don't know already, I'm Katherine Fauvre, and I'm the creator of Tritype, which was based on many years of research. I must say that the concept emerged immediately, but the nuances and how to work with Tritype has evolved over time. I've worked with the Enneagram 38 years, so I had some concepts, and I'd already worked with many, many typologies before I learned the Enneagram. So for me, it was a natural evolution to keep refining. I never intended to do years of research or 23 studies. It's just with each study, I learned more and more and more that helped me understand why people don't type accurately and what is needed to really create change. So I just kept going. Plus, I'm an ENTP, so it's just fascinating to me. So for those of you who don't know, my co-teacher is Spencer Chernick. He's qualified. I learned the Enneagram when I was pregnant with Spencer. So he's never known anything other than the Enneagram. And he took an avid interest as a very young boy. And you may have seen him on YouTube where he's like 9 years old and I'm interviewing him. And what had happened is I was doing some of my research, and every evening I was typing. And he said, I want to be typed. He was tired of me being in the room, not available to him in my office. And I said, yeah, but you already know you're typing. He goes, but I want a typing interview. I want to see what you're doing. I want to do typing interviews. And I said, okay. And you can see him on YouTube. There was a version that was hard to hear and the color was really off because it's 30 years ago. Or 28 years. It's
just shy of 30. Yeah.
It's a long time.
I was like 7 or 8.
No, you were almost 9.
Okay.
Actually,
like 27 years ago.
Yeah. So it's been a while.
A little bit.
Anyhow, he's subsequently been in my other videos. Anything I've ever done, he's been involved in. So you can see various renditions of Spencer. But here we are. And the way this is going to work is I want to tell you just a few things about Tritype that are really important. Most of you have probably read up on Tritype. Just make sure you're reading what I've written because there's a lot of misinformation. It's not hugely different, except that it makes a huge difference in what your Tritype is. And then after I go through these key points, I'm going to turn it over to Spencer, and he's going to share with you a really simplified way in which he works with Tritype that actually is amazingly effective. Now, we are both 8s. We both have 4 in the Tritype, but where we're different is that 6 and 7. Spencer's an 8-6-4. I'm an 8-7-4. We're both sexual, so you can see why he wanted to be in on the typing interview. And we are also different in our secondary instinct. I'm sexual self-pres and Spencer's sexual social. Is there anything you want to say, Spence?
I just can't stress enough, like the subtleties. Like, I think you said that really well. When you're like, it's not like you're going to find like hugely different information out there, but understanding the idiosyncrasies and the specific qualities of like Tritype makes a huge difference, because it's recognizing all three numbers together and how that actually makes a type of its own. And without that recognition, we can easily miss something, miss that, because when this combines with this gets magnified. But when you have this and this kind of gets more hidden. You know, it's a very interesting concept. So when you understand that, it's like, take it in all at once, see it for the whole thing that it is, makes a lot more sense. Not to mention, like, you know, you're dominantly these two, but like just a little bit of this one, you know, or equally spread or whatever the case. There's that element too that also makes it a lot of fun to play with.
Yeah, it's a good point, Spencer, because really we have them in an order of dominance, but they're always operating at all times 24/7 at a very rapid speed that we can't really even track. It's so lightning fast. But having said that, there's still a way we can begin to observe the language we use. And once we fully understand the defense strategies and we observe what happened right before we overreacted or underreacted or went on tilt in some way, and start just tracking it and following what you were feeling beforehand. Now, some types will know it immediately, like 4s generally can immediately trace what was going on with them. Other types might think they're tracing it, but they're looking at how someone upset them. And you don't want to do that with Tritype. You want to see your defense strategy with or without the other person, what you were feeling when you acted out. Now, with 8s, it can be a little difficult because we have the defense strategy of denial. So we can begin to see that something's gone wrong when we get a little too flippant and a little too direct. And if we can begin to observe that, we will find that 5 minutes ago or 5 days ago or 5 weeks ago, our feelings were hurt. But that would make us weak to let in. So it's kept in denial. Now, the 4, on the other hand, and the 6 are really hyper aware of when they feel stressed or hurt. So they know immediately, but if they can explain it according to their particular defense strategy, takes practice, just as it does for everyone else. Okay, so originally I just talked about Tritype as 3 types, and then I discovered that Oscar Chazo had come up with Trifix. So I thought, why confuse people? And then later discovered that he never wrote anything on Trifix. Everything came from me, but I gave a Chazo attribution. So a lot of people were quoting things from Chazo that actually he never said. And it became a little problematic after a few years. So in 2007, when I was teaching a Trifix course, I met with a member of the board of directors of Eureka, which is the school that was founded on Oscar Chazo. And they wanted to trademark the term Trifix, but unfortunately, every mention to it led back to me. So it would have prevented them from having that term because I was identified with it. Well, I immediately said no problem because I was already trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with this problem of people not knowing what came from whom and when, and what was my research based on my testing instrument and my Enneagram questionnaire. And they said, well, if you wouldn't mind, that would be really great because we'd like to trademark the term Trifix. I go, I don't mind at all. I'll send out an email to my list and online when I get home tonight. And they said, well, we just wanted to say one more thing as to what you should name it. And I said, don't worry about it. I'm just going to go back to 3 types, the name I had originally. And they said, no, we've talked about it. And we think you should be Tritype because your research evolved totally separate from Echazo. You didn't know about Echazo's trifix. Very few people did. He didn't even start telling people till recently, and this was in 2007. Although I did meet people as early as 1996, like late summer 96, early 97, that mentioned the word. But as a common experience, no, there weren't a lot of people. And they were in a school where they weren't going online and discussing it. So it really wasn't out there. But they said, because your research is based on the whole type, you should be Tritype, because Oscar Echazo only uses the fixation of each type. And he has no description of what happens when the 3 types come together. So I thought, great, done. And that was immediate. And I've been really comfortable with that because now it matches what actually is happening and how that evolved. So originally I just called it 3 types, and that there was a hierarchy, one from each center, because that became very noteworthy to me, that people who didn't know one another, and I was doing typing interview after typing interview, the one that Spencer wanted to be in on, I was supposed to do 10 interviews, and I did over 500 interviews because I thought, well, wait a minute, I want to know people who know the Enneagram, don't know the Enneagram, what they say, what they don't say, how it unfolds, and came up with my own inquiry process where I included work that I'd already done as an executive with a cosmetic company that I worked with, and the Enneagram. But what you'll see with that little interview with Spencer is more what they needed me to do, the areas, the way they wanted to have me go through the types, where I find it's easier to just take the adjectives and define them. And if you've had a typing interview, you know what I'm talking about. So now I talk about Tritype as a 27-point typing system, because it isn't 9 and it isn't 3. There are 27 variations. So I make that distinction, but you have 1 head type, 1 heart type, and 1 gut type. And then they're in a stacking order. Now, the main thing I want to emphasize, because I'm finding that people have some misinformation because they've read it on Personality Cafe, or it's been copied, and modified, that you just choose the type you relate to in each center. Well, that's certainly a beginning, but that's not how you determine type or Tritype. You must see the defense strategy. And it's the uncomfortable part of the defense strategy, not what you do, but why you do what you do. And then the order in which that gets triggered. So as 8, Spencer and I are triggered if we feel weak and disempowered, like we can't influence the outcome of the situation. And that's when we'll get more definite. And then you'll see the assertion for power. Now, the other thing that happens, if there's no power structure in place, the 8 will immediately go in. If there's no 8, then the person that has 8 in the Tritype will step in. Then the same happens the other way around. If I work in businesses and there's no heart type, then someone will use their heart type when there's an absence of a focus of attention on the heart type, because we innately recognize all 3 centers. We're just not aware of them the way we aren't aware of the Enneagram until we learn about it. So what I'm stressing is that just combining the 3 preferred types is a beginning, but it does not determine your Tritype. And the reason it's so important to get the correct 3 is that together they create a new type unto itself that's very different. So even though Spencer and I are 8s with 4 in the Tritype and we're both sexual, that 7 and 6 make it very different in how we're going to ultimately strategize when we're feeling stressed. I'm going to go more positive and into the future, more into data, and he's going to get more visceral and might experience doubts. You tell me, Spencer, what do you experience? Different from, myself as your mom. Like I might assert like an 8, but then I needed to quickly move to something that would be a positive resolution. You can't stay in negativity a long time.
I welcome it. My 8-4-6 combo tells me that it's important to sit in it, even if it's uncomfortable, because the idea is I want to get deeper and deeper and deeper and understand why this happens so we can better prevent it from happening again. So even though it might be torturous for my 8 in this way or my 4 in this way, although honestly, I feel like it's my 4 that is most comfortable keeping the conversation elongated and the feelings. It's my 6 that's like, have we covered all the bases? Have we really, really answered why this conflict occurred, why this complication occurred? I'm glad that everyone's all hunky-dory now and we all understand it was misunderstanding. Great, we're good. Is this going to happen again? Because I don't want this to happen again and have us be like, oh, we know what to do. It's just what happens. Like, no, I don't want that to happen. So I use my 6 to go deeper and kind of stay in it a little longer and poke and try to see if there's any, something that looks like a wall, but really it's just paper. And if you poke, it'll poke a hole. So I really just want to check out everything and just make sure. I'd rather annoy you a little longer and then protect us as a whole and go a little deeper into it than just be like, I'm sure it's fine. Because if it's not, I'm not protecting the people in front of me, myself, whatever. I feel like I'm letting them down.
And Spencer has the 3 reactive types. 4 is the reactive type and visceral type of the heart center. 6 is the reactive type of the head center. And the 8 is the reactive type of the gut center. So the 4-6-8 Tritype is meant to immediately go into action. Even if you had a happy childhood, it's just a natural way to manage problems. Now, I want to find the meaning. Certainly when my boys were young and they were conflicting, I would say, sit down, and I put them each in a chair and said, we're going to talk feelings. And that's because I grew up with an 8 father where we never talked feelings. And I thought, wait, we're not putting the feelings about this on the table. And that's where I was different from my father, because my father was the 8-7-3. So it really, really is important to get those 3 types accurate. Okay, so does that make sense? Everyone, consider that you must find the defense strategy of each type in your Tritype. And it can be uncomfortable. Like I didn't want it to be 4 because I thought that'd make me too weak. And yet when I realized it was 4, I discovered why I could bear witness to others in a way that my father could not. He was like, are we gonna have to talk a lot about this? And then of course, if you have 6, then you want to talk about it even more. But I was more than my dad as an 8-7-3. He was also social, so that makes a difference. He was social sexual. But just think of what was true for you most of your life, most of the time, not who you could be, should be, want to be, or have become. Actually, no matter what we've become, our defense strategy is the same. So it would be there when you were 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old, and thereafter. Spencer, just talk about how you grew up with the Enneagram and the renditions along the way and how frustrated you were when I said, hey, you know about the integration, disintegration? Sorry about that, but Naranjo says that was a misquote. And you had it all down. You could tell anybody their lines and what it meant and their wings. And I go, well, we have both wings. And we moved to both lines. And then we got to look at these 3 types, not just one. And you said, oh, okay. But do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Because you were pretty young.
Yeah, I liked feeling like I knew what I needed to know. And I wanted to stay in that wonderful place of, I know all I need to know and I don't need to learn anything more. And I can pass on knowledge and teach things and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, hey, you know that thing you know? So a little bit of a change. So it's like, okay. And so I have to like get into blah, blah, blah. And then that would happen again. And it would just be like, yeah, I remember getting frustrated just because I didn't like having to go back and explain something different and have someone be like, wait, because my sexual and social are really, really close. So for multiple reasons, I didn't like that I switched it up. You know, it just bothered me, and I was concerned about how that made me look in terms of if I knew what I was talking about. I want people to trust me and not really second guess anything I'm saying. And obviously, if you're kind of like, well, blah, 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 then that can definitely impact that.
Can I say something? That's a really important point, because I was faced with the same dilemma. I'd been teaching the Enneagram for 9 years. And then I'd certified with 3 excellent schools, but none of the schools had actually studied directly with Echazo or Naranjo, and things were lost in the dissemination of the Enneagram. And after my research, I found these patterns that weren't in the descriptions, language that wasn't in the description. But when I went to Claudio Naranjo, who studied directly with Echazo and then came up with the subtypes, I went, well, this matches my research. And then I came and said, Spencer, you're not going to like it, because 4, 6, 8s don't like change in that way. But to be fully empowered, we have to come from what's true. So what I did is notified everybody that had ever come to a class or a coaching session with me and said, I've learned more about the defense strategies of the types, and I need to refine some of you and inform you of these key distinctions. And actually, people so identified with what I said that they weren't offended. It worked the other way around. And then thereafter, people knew that whenever I was going to teach a course, that I was going to have something new from my research and be refining things. And some companies would just bring me in every 6 months to a year just to see what I'd come up with. So what they liked was that I wasn't just going by something concrete, that it was a living thing. But it's hard to do when you're 5 years old and you've got your little spiel down and you know what you're talking about. And now I get it, Spence. I totally get it. And I do have social third, so it's different. Yeah. Okay, now will you share with us what you do with your clients and how that evolved?
Yeah. A lot of therapy is really just kind of connecting. I mean, there's all these external elements, don't get me wrong, but they at some point facilitate defense mechanisms that we create at a very early age. And I always joke that there's like the emotional version of, I want to say, Newton's second law, objects in motion stay in motion until met with friction. Well, beliefs work that way too. Until someone or something happens where it really, really shows us like, hey, that's not accurate, we carry that forward. And if we don't recognize that, we'll think we're stupid all the way to adulthood because we felt stupid as a child, even though we've shown ourselves our intelligence multiple ways since. But no one was like, you're smart or something like that, to really create enough friction for it to be like, am I? Like, I remember using the word clever my whole life, but not smart. because with my ADHD, I was put in a room, one class, per week to like help me catch up on my homework and have them explain it to me slower and all that kind of stuff to help with my comprehension. And kids would call it like the stupid room and things like that. So that locked in. And until I really recognized, well, there's 7 types of intelligences and blah, 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 and school doesn't reflect right brain learning, yada, yada, yada. So that's what created the friction for me. So there eventually creates an inner conflict. And that's really, really highlighted in Tritype, right? So there's like, for example, like when 9 and 3 are in the same Tritype, there's that desire to be a go-getter, knock things off the list, be moving, doing, be like a mover shaker. But then the 9 who wants to relax and sit and watch, Netflix and chill, engage in self-care and really just, go with the flow and not be the thing that's facilitating. And that's an inner conflict. When you're working hard, you want to be relaxing, but when you're relaxing, there's something you should be doing at that moment. So there's this like inner conflict that can be created in Tritype, and it gets magnified further if all 3 are not the same place or 2 versus 1, that kind of vibe. At the same time, it's a really good way to highlight, this might sound hokey, but I'm not really big on like strength, weakness, because in my opinion, the same thing is a strength if you use it here, but if you use it over there, it's not. It depends who you're talking to, the situation you're using it in, the frequency that you use it, the intensity that you've used it. There's too many variables to just label it just as this is always, because if it's always a strength, it should work all the time with everybody, which is not the case. Sometimes I'm considered confident and straightforward. Other times I'm obnoxious and like to hear the sound of my voice. Depends who I'm talking to and what the setting is. So, recognizing that like, oh, the thing that all 3 numbers have in common, that's probably what you're going to think is your strength, where you're going to feel most comfortable when it's something that you lean towards. But there's also something that all 3 numbers are like, I'm good. Nope. No, thank you. I don't need that over here. And that's the thing that you triple avoid. And then when 2 out of 3 feel one thing, then there's an inner conflict. When all 3 feel differently, that's a different kind of conflict. So I really use that to be like, is this the message you send yourself because of the numbers doing this, that, and the other? And that really helps people go, oh, other people have this conflict. I'm like, well, yeah, it's very normal. And it really allows to normalize. It really allows me to normalize, which I think is the most healing part of therapy. It's like, oh, cool, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one that does this. Anything you want to add to that, Mom?
Yeah, you're so right. I want to say a few things about what he said, because there are known defense strategies that we would recognize in therapy. And there are 9 distinct defense strategies, but we really use the 3, the one from each center. And that means when we're in an emotional situation, we're going to use the resources positively or negatively of our heart type. When we're in a situation where we need to know something, we're going to use our head type, our mental type. And when we have to make a decision about doing something or not doing something and it's visceral, we're going to use our gut type. Now, when I said this 30 years ago, people were like, oh, wait, no, that can't be right. Your type would determine that. But if you know anything about the Enneagram, the lines of connection do not enable all 9 types to access all 3 centers. And this is when I knew that my clients were onto something, because 2 and 4 have no connection to the head center, yet they have a head type, and 5 and 7 have no line of connection to their heart center. Now, there are a number of reasons for that. The Enneagram that we use is the Enneagram of motion, which is thought to be creation plus divinity and the dynamic movement within the universe. So I know that's why Achazo chose that system, and I'm imagining that's what Gurdjieff thought as well. But I just want to clarify, any 9-pointed system, and there's a great one early on from a scholar that recognized that every type is related to every other type. And that's a whole nother thing to go into the history. but I see how every type relates to every other type, positively and negatively. So if you're given a test to choose between two opposites, then you're going to choose the one you identify with. But when there are two very close, you're going to perhaps have more of a struggle. That's why I work in patterns of 3 with the testing instrument. And I have you rank over and over and over again. I gave you 3 versions of every type, and you determined your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice of each type. And then I tested you in a number of ways accordingly. So the other thing I want to say is that the union of the 3 defense strategies is still governed by your instinctual type. I wanted so much for it to be that you had, like, for example, I would be sexual 8, and I'd be self-pres 7, and social 4. I thought that would be elegant. That's probably my 4 in the Tritype. That would be fluid, easy. Everyone could stack their 3 types, stack their 3 instincts, and then come up with that pattern. And it is true at an advanced level. But what happened instead is the instinct is so strong that it dominates the system and is the governing factor. And this was absolutely the opposite of what was thought at the beginning of the dissemination of the Enneagram. It was believed that your type governed it. Now, I have to distinguish between what Echazo said and what Naranjo said. Echazo saw the types, and actually it's a very elegant system where he saw the types as instinctual triads. And I don't want to confuse you, but I want to make the distinction that the subtypes were Naranjo's interpretation of the lowest functioning, more primitive element of your ego type. So he added the subtypes as variations within type. And he began in 1972 noticing these tells, the ways he could begin to just recognize a type. So it's important to know how things began, and I'd love to tell you all about that. But in this class, we're going to go now into Spencer's shortcut as to how he languages this with the clients. But I want to say one last thing, and that is he mentioned something really important, that it could be 3 having a similar view and it's harder, but we always have 1 that's really dominant and the 2 to a lesser degree, and they make decisions pretty easily. But people who have 2 types really close can go back and forth and back and forth. And more importantly, if something needs to be decided, like in my case of an emotional nature, my 4 is so small compared to my 8 and 7 that all I know is I want to give meaning to this suffering. I don't want to stay in the suffering any more than Spencer does. And I want to not necessarily go into denial over, although it worked quite well. It didn't work in the long run because I was repeating patterns and not knowing how I was coming across to others. I go, what? Wait, you have a problem with that? I'm just giving you the truth. I can't show you any greater respect. That's what I tell my high school friends or my elementary school friends. And they go, what? Not everybody wants to know the truth. And I said, I want to know the truth. And 8s do. We don't want to have things we don't know. Tell us the worst, then we'll deal with it. But other types are like, what? They're waiting for the other shoe to fall. Yeah, I don't have that. I'm going to give you both shoes right up front. The velocity of those giving you those shoes may vary, but there's no hidden agenda or something that's coming later. But if you have 6 in the Tritype, then you're looking for that. Now, last but not least is that when Spencer was talking earlier, he really hit upon what you may know as Hornavian types. Now, what's interesting about Karen Horney, and she wrote a book, Our Inner Conflicts, is she was a 2 that was just incredible at recognizing these 3 distinct types of defense strategies as overall defense strategies. And we now call them the Hornavian types. And they were actually first developed by Kathy Hurley and Ted Dobson, who later became Theodore Donson. If you see both names, one's not a typo, he changed his name. And then later developed by Don Riso and Russ Hudson. So it's so complementary. And Claudio Naranjo loved the work of Karen Horney. And as a psychiatrist that was also doing psychoanalytical work and working with the most progressive views in the 60s, he liked all those systems. So that's another story. But Spencer, you just hit on things that are really, really important. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Carry on.
So the shortcut to explaining Tritype, that's what you're referring to?
Yeah, how you explain it to your clients beyond what you shared.
Yeah. I like to use colors. So a lot of times people don't understand. It's like, okay, so I have like the 8, the 4, the 6. Sometimes it's these 3 numbers, and they see them as individuals, and then they're like, okay, well, I don't really align with this part of the 8. I don't align with this part of the 4. So the way to think of it is, I want you to think that you've got 3 different colors, and one of them takes up like half of the paint palette, right? And then another one takes up like a third, and then the other one takes up a sixth. And you mix those all together. It's going to create its own color. It's going to be mostly the first color. Then you're going to second most notice the second color. And then thirdly, the third color. Now you can change the ratios. It'll be the same color, but maybe you'll think it has more of a tint to this, more of a tint to that, which is why a different order of a tritype will actually connect with a different order of the same tritype, as opposed to what a lot of people think is like 2 8s. They'll get each other even if they have 7, 6, and 2 and 3. It's like, no, actually they'll get each other on the 8 level, but they won't get the other 2 parts. So understanding it as its own type, it's how they all come together. And then what you see. And granted, when my 4 comes out, when my 6 comes out, you will recognize the 4 and the 6. But it's really me as an 8 putting on a 4 costume, putting on a 6 costume. I'm still going to approach it 8-like, because that is my primary number. That is what all the numbers are going to go through before they leave my mouth and communicate. So if I'm afraid and my 6 is really activating, I'm probably going to use anger and aggression to express that, because I'm trying to take control and I'm trying to be like, this is what needs to be done and blah, blah, blah. And people will misunderstand. I'm actually not angry. I'm frustrated that the thing I'm stressed out about isn't happening like how it needs to be happening, so I can protect and take care of blah, 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 blah. And I'm not trying to deal with like all this other stuff that you're trying to, no, I have a thing in my head. So I'm coming at it very directly and very specifically, but I'm being motivated, not necessarily by my 8. I'm just communicating it that way. But there's a lower number that's speaking, right? And so it's understanding that kind of breakdown. So I use colors to explain that, because sometimes people get lost. A lot of times when I'm working with my clients, they're like, yeah, but I'm a this, so blah, blah, blah. And I'll be like, well, yeah, but you also have these 2 other numbers that balance out this, magnify that, cancel out this, because they're just too clashy about that. And when you bring all of that together, it explains so much more. Because there's going to be individual parts of the numbers where you're like, oh, I don't identify with that. And I'm like, well, yeah, there's a reason for that. You got this other number, and it's also higher up on the totem pole. So that kind of gets hidden. Like if you really focus, you can find it, but it's not going to be as clear to you because one, maybe two other numbers are above that with some trait that kind of hides that or doesn't prioritize that. So it's really important to kind of see the whole picture for what it is. Is there anything you'd want to add to that?
No, that is great. And this hierarchy is always governed by your dominant type because they're in a stacking order. So they kind of move together. But as I said a moment ago, if the 8 has gotten emotional, their heart type is just kind of joining in. If they're in thinking process and they're emotional and feeling the need to be protective or assert, they're going to do so like their head type. And in Spencer's case, as a 6, it's very important because when 8 is in the tritype with a 6, the 6 becomes counterphobic. It's the most important thing I would hope that I can impart is that the counterphobic 6 is reactive, but they're trying to deal with fear. And some 6s feel the fear and move away from a perceived hazard or problem. And that would be more phobic. And other 6s, they can't tolerate the anxiety and they go right into it. And they're more counterphobic. But there's everything in between. But if you're a 6 with 8, you may think you're an 8, and everyone else might as well. If you're an 8 with 6, you're just going to need to get things mentally on par with everything else, because otherwise something could go wrong. And the 8's looking at the big picture of what could go wrong, recognizing it and then dealing with it. But the 6 says, wait, but this could go wrong too. And the 4's saying, well, yeah, but if I have to experience that, I'll have to suffer again and again and again. And I need to give meaning to my suffering. So that's so helpful, Spencer. So what do you do when you have someone that identifies? Well, let me say one thing first, and then I'll ask you your identification. There are 3 combinations that have a terrible time typing, and they all involve 6 and 9. The first is the 6 will never, rarely, maybe in 40 years, I have had 10 people that test as a 6. The reason for that is the defense strategy of 6 is you must conceal anything you feel uncertain about, insecure about, or that would make you less credible. There are a number of reasons. So you're just not going to recognize that fear is your motivator. People that feel fear generally feel anxiety, and they feel the need to have control to end their anxiety or get away from what's causing them anxiety. But the counterphobic is just as anxiety prone. They're just going to go right into it to get it over with. So they're going to provoke the problem. Wait, are you having a problem with me? What's going on here? And question. They're going to start questioning, challenging, and they'll get faster and more energized. Whereas the 8 is like, let me get this straight. And they slow down because they're a gut type. So you're telling me that John said this to you on this day in this way? Now, what would John say? And in a way, the 8 is setting you up to catch you in a lie, because the 8 has the fear of being manipulated. So the only way you can check out if someone's doing that is to set up a scenario that would enable the 8 to catch someone in their process of deception. But are we always right? Absolutely not. But that's the way the defense strategy works. So when someone says, oh yeah, that person's hot-tempered and really emotional all the time, and they're an 8, maybe they are, maybe they're not. But when the 8 is seeking control for their own reasons, now remember, all 9 types want control. Just how are you going to go about getting it is what's important. They're going to slow down, and they're going to want to tell you what they think if it's really important and they think it's like threatening in some way. But when they really want to know what's going on, they're not going to ask you in a kind of, oh, so this happened, and oh, okay. It's going to always say something to the effect, let me get this straight. And they're going to make the type say again whatever they've said, and it pokes holes in that tendency for most of us to just loop things together, like everyone says whatever. Oh, okay, so you're saying everyone says that. Everyone. Who's everyone? And it's just like the inquiry process. And it's like the Spanish Inquisition in a way, only it's not like a 1 about right or wrong. It's the 8 trying to figure out where they need to shore up, like what is vulnerable. And they'll never use the word vulnerable, by the way. That's totally a function of knowing the Enneagram. 8s just know they don't want to be weak and pathetic. We don't say, yeah, I don't want to be vulnerable. Or if an 8 says, I'm feeling vulnerable, a lot of times a 6 or a 4 will go, oh, yeah. Well, that's not that big a deal. Wait, I just told you I was being vulnerable. And when the 8 first learns the Enneagram, it's really hard to say that you're vulnerable about something. So this leads back to Enneagram type. Oh, the other combinations are if there's a 6 and a 9 together, it can be harder to determine the type. So they do handle the test in a similar way, but there are important distinctions. But the one that is also confusing is someone that's, let's say, a 2 with 6 and 9 in the Tritype. They won't be as clearly a 2 or whatever type they are. So if they're a 4 with 6 or 9, they'll have troubles. If they're a 3 with 6 or 9, they'll have troubles. They'll have the most trouble because those are 3 adaptable types. So sometimes it could just simply be that you have 2 indecisive types with 1 that wants to be appealing. And so it's easy to mistype. But as all things go, there are definitely types that know their type when they first hear it, even if it's incomplete. But if they understand the defense strategies, they'll always type correctly. And that will be the 1, the 4, the 5, the 7, and the 8. We don't have doubts about it. Once we understand, we're like, yeah, I can kind of do that. We might not want to admit it, but the other types are like, do I or don't I, or what are the circumstances in which I do that? And it can get confusing, especially if you've read a lot of stuff that is not addressing the defense strategy. You can't just look at the passion. You can't just look at the fixation. And you can't just look at one of those categories. You have to look at all of them together. The core fears and the defense strategies are the most important. So what do you do, Spencer, when someone's mistyped and you know they have a vested interest, they have an identity of being a particular type? Now, a lot of times, by the way, people have an identity because they've done a lot of looking And once they say, oh, I'm a 4, I've been sad a lot of my life. I feel sad immediately. I'm always sad. But they're actually not a 4. It's like cruel to them to just say you're not a 4, because that's like negating the part of that individual that's had their heart broken. So you have to weave into it. And I know that in some cases, it's taken a couple years for people in coaching to realize that they're actually the 6 or the 9, 6 in particular. But the way I help them find it is I'll say, this is more of the defense strategy of the 6 than it is the 4. Now, they don't know that because they haven't talked to thousands of people or hundreds of people. They just think they're sad and anxious, but it doesn't help them working with envy. 6s can be quite envious too, by the way, but in a different way. So how do you work with it and not just say, sorry, wrong, you're not this type. Get with the program. You're not going to create the kind of change you want until you get your type. That is true, but it does not work to assert that for anyone, because once it becomes our identity, it's a part of us, and it needs to be treated with respect.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I make sure to validate that any number can do anything. We get very behavior focused when we're typing ourselves. Like my mom was just saying, and then this is what I hear a lot, like, oh, I'm sad or I'm dramatic, so it must be 4. And I'll giggle to myself. I have 4 in my Tritype. I get where you're coming from. But anyone can be sad. Anyone can be dramatic. So you can actually honor their experience. They'll be like, oh yeah, totally. How human of you to have that experience, because that's what humans experience. What's the why behind that? And if there's, and it's because it depends why they're attached to it. Are they really attached to the identity of a number? Then I honor what they're attached to. Oh, I'm artistic and I'm this and I'm that. And I'm like, yeah, that's awesome, blah, blah, blah. And I honor it and I validate it. And I'm also like, what way are you artistic? Blah, 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 blah. And I can be like, oh, that's also something that can be this number because that number can be 2. Really? Blah, 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 blah. And so you kind of make it like, hey, you don't have to lose this quality that you're so attached to. We can just, like, I can call this a toaster if you want, but like, we can just recognize that it has certain things in common. You plug it in just like a toaster, blah, blah, blah. The moment we recognize it as a phone, we can use it properly. So understanding the why gets empowered that way. Sometimes, though, people are not necessarily attached to a number, but they're resistant to a number. They don't want to be associated with a certain number because of some label they've attached to it. The most common one I run into is 6. People don't want to, they think of like Chucky from Rugrats. Like all 6s just cower in a corner and they can't handle things. And they this and that. And I'm like, no, like it just means you're motivated by fear. You use fear to make decisions. You try to avoid negative outcomes. You're also very loyal, by the way. You tend to have a very playful and maybe kind of a little bit of a dark sense of humor. Ha ha ha. And so I throw in all these other things that are positive because for some reason, certain numbers, like I'm always breaking the mold of what people think 8s are. I'm supposed to be a you-know-what buster just by, because I'm an 8. I'm supposed to be a bull in a china shop who just doesn't know how he throws his energy around. I'm baby Huey. I don't know my own strength. I don't know my own intensity. I just dominate this, that, and the other thing. And so I've actually been interviewed when I was like a baby therapist and I wasn't private practice yet. And they actually used Enneagram and I saw their face shift when I mentioned I was an 8. I saw their eyes go, oh, you're going to talk over us in our collaborating sessions and you're going to insert your opinion. I could just feel it. Now, maybe I'm projecting all over them. It's totally possible. But I also didn't get hired. And I saw the shift the moment I mentioned I was an 8. They were all about it up until I mentioned that point. So people either attach to the qualities that they really, really, really feel good about themselves. Who wants to lose that? You don't have to. Other numbers can do that. Or you have this negative opinion of some number that's, first off, probably a huge exaggeration and also not fully accurate. There's all these other qualities that actually make it this and this and this. And you're like, oh, well, yeah, I am this and I am that. Well, it's like, yeah. And it's all good. Not to mention with 6, there's phobic and counterphobic, and just there's so much more to it. So I really just try to connect on a human level and just try to figure out where the connection, resistance, or over bonding is coming from. I normalize it. I make it feel better, is my attempt at least. Because in my head, I just want to be like, no, just listen to me, you're this. But that's not very helpful. And I use the attachment they have to either resist or go with also, by the way, as a tool in therapy, because now I'm like, ooh, you really need to connect to this, or you really need to resist this. That's info for me too, by the way. We can use that to better help understand your motivations and defense mechanisms that you use and so forth and so on. So that's,
Spencer, that's great. And I like that description. I especially like the way you're looking at how to help people see these variables. And one of the most important things with these identifications is these stereotypes. Now, there is a stereotype for each Enneagram type, and then there are 2 countertypes. That's also an incomplete dissemination of Naranjo's work. He just happened to, at a conference, just list 1 countertype. But when I raised the issue of countertypes in 1996, because they'd shown up in my research, he thought about it. He said, oh, yes, because he saw them as archetypes. And I said, well, I'm noticing that there's this stereotype, but then 2 of the instincts are not okay with the overt way in which we define a particular type. And then he said, yeah, so there would be 1 stereotype and 2 countertypes. And I think there's still a stacking order, and I've come up with that, and I'm going to list that order in my upcoming book, because I think it is helpful. Of course, I'm doing the 8th thing, and I'm giving you probably 10 books in one, because I feel like, wow, I've done all this research with the instincts and with the types since 1994 and learned more. And gee, if you don't understand this, you're not going to understand that. If you make it all this, then you won't know that. So I've got Tritype, I've got lexicon, I've got the instincts, I've got the types, and then I've got the errors in the dissemination of the Enneagram. And I'm working with a very understanding 9 that's editing it for me. And I'm going, yeah, we need to add that. Yeah, we need to add that. No, that needs to go here. Wait a minute. No, we need to put it there. And he's just amazingly wonderful about it. And because of him, I'm able to put it in. He's non-judgmental. And then I begin to think, Katherine, you've gone over the top. It's too much data. But then I still want critical things. So it will be coming out with more than I originally anticipated. But having said that, if we don't understand that, we're missing really important opportunities to self-assess. So helping people understand that that's an identification, which is critical and it doesn't go away. But let's also look at the difference between your identification and your defense strategy itself. And I can't say it enough times. Thank you. Now, Spencer, what do you do when a client is really set on a type? Have you been able to successfully move them into recognizing the qualities that are more head, heart, or gut? And what works in helping them begin to open up to the possibility of being the 6 or the 9?
sometimes I can accomplish it in one session. Other times it's over numerous sessions. There's a client that comes to mind that they started off as one Tritype, and we basically changed every number. And there was maybe 4 iterations by the time we fully landed. And we didn't identify that type until they started describing work self. At home, they portrayed a certain self, and that's what they were going off of, but they were more comfortable at work. They were actually more themselves at work. At home, because of the culture of the household and this and that, they were playing a role and actually so identified with that role that they kind of lost track of that. And I was already like really feeling that they were really actually my Tritype, funny enough. And they tested as a 459. And I just really was kind of just thinking, and I was like, gosh, you're a little more direct than this and that, and blah, 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 and the way you say this. So over time, I was just like, gosh, like, can I just read this to you again? And I'll bring up the little blurb and I'll read it to them. And I'll be like, because I'm really seeing the strength of this over here, like, because this number also has that. And again, I always throw out a flippant remark of like, in the end, if you connect to this, we can tailor treatment that way. But I want to be super accurate, because if we can really get the numbers right, it's gonna be off to the races so much more. So I basically constantly remind them of the empowerment of just getting it right and understanding that whatever they're attached to or resistant to can be explained by other things. And it's really just understanding what it is, kind of like what I was saying before. And I just keep bringing it up and I keep bringing it up. And eventually, if I just see them as like, nope, it's like, I'll still help them based on what they think they are. And I'll also play in my mind with what I think they are, and I'll combine them. It's like, cool, you're a 4, 5, 7, 9. It's fine. You know, like you're this 4 or 5 numbered, you're this quintitype. It's fine. It's okay. And then I'll just honor all the numbers and we'll just kind of move forward. But that eventually does let them connect to these other numbers, and then we can kind of pull away the other numbers, and then they're left with the 3, and then it's a little transitionary thing that I do, because there's no such thing as a good or bad Tritype. There's no such thing as a good or bad number. People feel that way a lot just because of their own associations, but there's beauty and strength and awesomeness in every single number and every single Tritype. And I feel like I've heard every way, up, down, left, right, when it comes to like, oh, you know, I really don't like that Tritype because it means I'm this. And I'm like, well, it also would mean this though. And also that's a little bit of a little hard on yourself definition right there. Let's loosen that up a little bit. And it's breaking free from whatever they're really connecting to. Once you do that, once you address the emotional attachment or detachment, it's so easy. But it's really helping them understand more than that. Because someone told them, I ran into this with various numbers. People can find a bad thing about any number anytime. I've heard about it all. So yeah, I remember someone came in once. Anyway, I don't want to digress too much, but I hear these things. I'm just like, where'd you get that from? Did you read that? Like, oh, I heard someone say that once. And I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, I get it. But yeah.
And I love sharing information, and I was on listservs from the very beginning of the internet. But what I have found is that people that have not been to a training or accurately typed are disseminating information based on their own misunderstandings. So they might describe a type a certain way, and if they're really the type that's going to write a lot, type a lot, and be articulate, they're going to seem pretty darn on it, but they're still describing behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And the Enneagram, the way it was originally taught, now I learned the Enneagram before there were books. There was one book, I should correct that, but it was only sold when one of the authors was teaching. And there were 3 Catholics that created the first Enneagram book. It's a white book called The Enneagram, but it was relatively unknown by most people. In fact, When I found the Enneagram, I just had my bookstore do a search for anything on the Enneagram anywhere, and it didn't show up. Just like you wouldn't find my books. I mean, they were on Amazon for a while, and then I took them off to keep the prices lower. And you have to get them directly from me, and that way I can keep revising them and you get the most current version. But they came out in the end of 87 is when Don Risso's first book came out. And Helen Palmer's first book came out in January of 88. So it's just a month apart. And once there were books, we could begin to see nuances of type. Having said that, Don Risso didn't know about the subtypes. And Helen had a lot that was like a Chazo Naranjo mix, but some things that weren't totally accurate. Whereas Don came up with a lot of very creative understanding of the internal world of each type. In fact, it took him 12 years to write the book because he was trying to intuit what each Enneagram type would be thinking and feeling. Now, I certainly changed my viewpoint the more I had hundreds of people and then thousands of people. You start to see common denominators, and then some of what maybe was understood falls out, like in a sand sifter. That's what Naranjo liked. Do types go through the little sand sifter into the right pile? And there's always a small group of people that don't. And I really see the same thing. I mean, we can have a bell curve that might be accurate, but that's not enough for me. It has to be way over to one side to be considered a real true factor of the types. And I learned the most from the types themselves. Now, Spencer, one thing you said was the role. And this is so important because all of us have a role that we're trying to fulfill. The type that's determining what type of role we should have is our heart type. And the 2 is going to find a way, if you have 2 in the Tritype, to be needed and valued for what you give. If you have 3 in the Tritype, you're going to try and figure out the role that the family values, and then you're going to want to improve it even more. You want to fulfill the family dream. And then the 4 in the Tritype wants to find the unique and individual way that you can have a role in the world that's more exclusive. Now, the way we figure out how we're going to go about solving things mentally will be the 3 head types. And the 5's going to do it on their own. They're not going to ask anyone. I get a smile on my face when people go on the internet, and I've sent a lot of these questions. I rarely have time to answer them. Will you answer this for so-and-so on Quora or Reddit? And someone will say, I'm a 5, and I don't know if I'm a 549 or a 548. And what do you think? I'll just write this, and then you tell me what you think. Do you think a 5 would ever do that in a million years, even if you only know this much about type 5? No way, no how. The 5 cannot be ignorant or dependent upon others. They must become their own expert, study something totally separate from what anyone else would say. And they're certainly not going to put something on the internet. But what type will? A 6, because you want a lot of opinions. And like sometimes people will get really frustrated with my test. Usually it's 5 stars, but then there'll be these 1 stars or 2 stars if they're generous. But what they will say is, nope, didn't type me correctly, so it's not a good test. And they'll mention, yep, it came out that I was a 6, but then I have this tritype and they don't match. Well, right in there is a hallmark of what happens with a 6 or a 9. And they miss the part where there are asterisks that will be telling them that. And they'll just think the test doesn't work, but actually the test does work. It's just they don't want to see it. And it's so interesting the way I have to ask people, well, did you receive any asterisks? Which ones did you receive? Now, when they're just evaluating the test, I'm not able to communicate back. But I've decided to put up some of the ways that the types can be frustrated. And 6s are so frustrated that they type differently with different tests. They can take the same test and type differently, different days or the same day. And they think there's a glitch in the test when it doesn't come out the type they want to be, or someone told them that they are. And by working with them individually, I've learned that I'm saying, wait a minute, you just described all these things that are indicative of type 6. Do you disagree with the 6 cards? Are there any words on the 6 card that are not true? And there are 3 different 6 cards. And they say, well, no, I guess I do that. But yeah, I just don't want to be identified with that. Well, I don't do that. I said, but overall, archetypally, are you defending like a 7? Or are you defending more like a 6? Are your fears and concerns more like a 7 or more like a 6? Well, it's like a 6, but I want to be like a 7, or they might want to be like a 9 or a 2 or whatever the type is. And I said, okay, but what made you choose that? If it's true, why didn't you just take the test like with fresh eyes? And they say, oh, I already know what the types are. I said, you still have to choose. I know what the types are. I created the test, but to test the test, I had to clear my mind and say, okay, Katherine, archetypally, if you have this whole card against this card and this card, which you have to do originally with each type, then what would it be? And there is a problem where I give you 9 versions. Well, I give you 27, 3 different versions of each type, but your first choice card is tested against other first choice cards. Your second choice card is tested against other second choice cards. But there is a point when your first choice cards in one column come up against your second choice cards in the second column. But you may really identify as well with your second choice card. And that's usually because they're in your tritype. But if it's a wing, like a 6 and a 7, then you just have to sort out which defense strategy you use. And if someone says, yeah, I can't tell them if I'm a 5 or a 7, there's only one type that can't tell if they're a 5 or a 7. And that's the 6, because they are both. They're the center of the head center. Or if people say, oh, yeah, I can't tell if I'm an 8 or a 1. The type that has that problem is a 9. Someone says, well, I can't tell, I'm going back and forth between 2 and 4. That's a 3. The other thing is 3, 6, and 9 are all trying to seek balance. And so they're adapting, and they're no longer extreme in their expression. So the 2 is like, I have an abundance. I can help you. And I must be positive. You must see me as positive so that you want to have my advice and come to me. Then I feel secure. Whereas the 4 is, yeah, I don't want to give you a bunch of advice, and I don't want you coming to me with everything. But if you want to talk about deep, tragic experiences and aesthetic elements that the 4 values, and like 1 4, it might be an art critic, another 4, it might be a food critic, but it'll be a critic of some type, then they're very different, because one's coming from the, can you believe how pedantic that is? That's more 4. A 2's not going to say that. Say, well, they have a place too, and they're going to come from the positive. Now, I'm not saying there aren't 2's that aren't art critics or food critics. I'm just saying overall, the 2 is upbeat. The 7 is upbeat. The 4 and the 6 are downbeats. So that's why 2 and 7 are misidentifying, and 4 and 6 can misidentify as the other. But actually, another important point is a whole chunk of type 2, the libertine part of 2, especially the wild card 2, that seems kind of 8-ish and 7-ish. They always think they're 7s with an 8 wing. But it's because that part of 2 was put into 7. And how can you tell the difference? Because the 2 is trying to make this emotional connection with you. And the 7 is just trying to share interesting, fun ideas. Occasionally they'll go into the depth of something, but boy, they don't want to stay there. And they sure don't want to stay in their negative emotions. Whereas other types can. And how repetitive is the issue, the emotional issue. So the 3, 6, and 9 are the primary types, and they will identify more with their wing types than their actual type. So that, just get that out there. A lot of people don't realize it. So Spencer, is there something you want to say before we go to Q&A that I've triggered?
I really agree. I always, I say to my clients and also just to myself that the 3, 6, 9s are like the shapeshifter numbers because they can really, for different reasons, really connect to other numbers, especially because they are in themselves motivated to not identify as self. There's a motivation to connect or second guess or imitate others. And then I just cracked a joke about a client that I just got that texted me saying that test was like the hardest thing ever, and they were a 936. I was like, yeah, I bet it was. I bet that was your nightmare. I'm really, really sorry. But thank you so much for putting the work in. And the only other thing I'd want to add is something I thought of earlier. For any of you 8s out there that are really struggling with connecting to your vulnerability, I came up with an 8 definition that really, really helped me. Choosing to be vulnerable is your way of saying to both yourself and whoever you're engaging with that, yeah, I can open the armor and whatever you throw my way, I'll be able to handle. I'll be okay. It might suck for a little bit. It might hurt. All those things are true, but it's not going to take me out of the game. Me fearing vulnerability is almost telling myself, I won't survive this. So when I connected to my 8 strength and wanting to feel powerful and wanting to feel like, nah, I got this, I changed that definition. And it's almost like I'm running towards the burning building of vulnerability now. When I'm in a conflict, I just go vulnerable. Earlier in today's thing, I talked about the freaking dumb room that I was in, right? That was me being vulnerable, but I was like, nah, it's all good. Like, I'm helping people. It's clarifying this, that, or the other. And now there's just a lot of power in it. So it's all about just the switching and the relabeling. And I wanted to bring that up earlier, but there wasn't like a perfect moment. So
That's perfect, Spencer, because surviving is what all the types are doing. Mm-hmm. Because unconsciously, the defense strategy says you will die if you do this.
Right.
And the 8 needs to have the credibility, the reputation. And each type, there's a way in which you need to hold that identity and not show the weakness of your type, because then you will In the case of the 8, be disempowered. In case of the 1, be wrong. In case of the 2, be unwanted. In the case of the 3, be unuseful. In the case of the 4, unoriginal. In the case of the 5, vulnerable and easily overpowered. In the case of the 6, not knowing what to do, and people respecting you and your information because you've shown an insecurity. And the 7, that you will be uncool. And the 8, disempowered. And the 9, a problem. You have to go along to get along to not be a problem. So I could just go on and on and on and on. But one thing I want to clarify is that, if I didn't already, because I've been training a lot the last few weeks, when I write about the tritypes, that a particular tritype is the most positive tritype, or the most passive tritype, or the most sensitive tritype, whatever I say, don't take that in a really negative, literal way. Like when I say the 269 is the most passive tritype, what I mean by that is that they're least inclined to show you negative emotion. They're going to pass on showing you their negative emotion. They're going to try and meet your need instead. All types are very powerful in their own way. But I was making generic descriptions, but it's much better if I say it rather than write it, because when you write it, people go, oh, I'm that, or I'm not that, or I'm that. But if I say it, it makes more sense. So if I say the 479 is the most receptive, it just means energetically they feel more like they're going to accept you. Now, at an advanced level, as I was saying probably yesterday, is that the 3, 6, and 9 are really important. And if we look at tritype on down the line, they all stem from 3, 6, or 9. And then there is how quickly do you get to each tritype. They kind of blossom out. And the first 9 tritypes were recognized, Hornavians being one of them, dichotomies plus a center type or harmonics being another, and the primary 3 triads. But like I would meet people and say, yeah, that's like a reflective triad, but you don't fit that perfectly. Like you've got the 4 and the 5, but I really see more of an 8 rather than 9. And I'd kind of like adapt it and modify it. And I thought, no, this is just too consistent. And it wasn't until I realized that, no, those were only 9 of 27. And if you just make cubes and map it out and have every combination against every other combination in terms of the 3 centered, you see all 27 of them. They were always there. But those first types were just recognized. The Hornavian types, for example, they were recognized. But you, instead of a 1, 2, 6, you could be 1, 2, 5. And you're not wrong for saying, oh, I guess I must be 6 because I relate to the 1 and 2. No, not necessarily. Once you get to tritype. But before tritype, you would feel like you had to choose. So yes, the sensitive intellectual will think they're a 4. The kind of avoidant, introverted, reserved, smart person that can be awkward, you'll think you're a 5. If you blurt out and you get angry, you or others will think you're an 8. But hey, counterphobic 6s blurt more than an 8 could ever even imagine, because we think that's giving away too much power. We can blurt, but we're not going to try and prove it to you. So the minute someone's trying to prove something, well, I'm this type for these reasons, and they write paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, that's trying to prove something, to prove a perspective. It's not going to bother, because if you don't know what type I am, that's a personal problem on you. Like when I first learned the Enneagram and I knew I was an 8, my friends said I was an 8. And I go, what? Wait, what is this? And then we talked about it. And I go, yeah, I guess so. But as I said, I could recognize the 4, but that was a secret because the 8 didn't want to expose that. So, but these are all important factors. So just know that when I'm saying passive, I'm not saying weak and pathetic. And when I'm saying reflective, I'm just saying they're more inclined to be introspective. But whether that's good, bad, or the person's healthy or unhealthy, whether they get angry or sad, 2 different things. So every type gets sad, every type gets angry, and every type is going to have to think through things and figure out how to do something. So again, it's what do you do in what order, like Spence mentioned in the beginning. Do you think, feel, act? Do you act, think, feel? Or another variation? Like I act, and when after I've done something, I go, God, why did I do that? And then I'm thinking about it. I go, oh, maybe it's because I felt that. I'm not going to what I felt till 3rd. So just begin to notice whether you're like caught in the thinking, spinning, or if you are trying to divert to happier thoughts, more 7, or if you're cautious and you're not going to act till you've thought it through, or you're not going to act until you know what you're feeling. These are all very important. We use all 3. And that's the beauty of Tritype and Trifix, is that you're using all 3 centers, just in what order. So that's why Tritype helps people with typing. Okay. Anything before we go to Q&A now? Any questions? Anything having to do with Tritype, talking about Tritype, your own Tritype, or that of someone else, or working with someone with a different Tritype? We're open to questions. Okay, Jane.
There I am. I'm sorry, my forward-facing camera failed again, so I can't show up. I very much apologize for that. But I do have an overview question because I don't know. I'm a confused person right now because my type is 592, and I have the 7 the asterisks that indicate that I might be a hard to type social 6. So I have no idea how to approach that.
Well, what 3 types did you come out as? 5, 9, and 2?
592.
And what type did it show that you have?
Like the individual one at the top.
The overall type?
5.
Okay. And then in your Tritype was 5 first and then 9?
5 first, 9 is middle, and 2 is at the end.
Okay. And what instinct?
Social.
Okay. Well, that's an important note because the social 5 can be pretty confusing because they're more inclined, especially if they have 2 in the Tritype, to want to move towards others. And they'll find a way to do so. It'll still be on their own time, in their own way, and maintaining their sense of self-sufficiency. But the 2 wants to find a way to help and move towards others. And the 5 moves away from others and does not want to be invaded. So how do you move towards others? And how do you move away from others?
It's hard to explain that. I have like split personality about that. Sometimes I really want people, and sometimes I'm very happy to be by myself. And I've managed COVID very well, being homebound about 3 years for the most part. And then I'll have these little periods of wanting contact, probably on my more on my demand than, well, if somebody else actually, I think that's kind of confusing because I exhibit some of those polarities.
So let me ask you this. When you, in general, if there wasn't COVID, from the time you were in elementary school, high school to this day, how did you negotiate people, groups?
Well, I got awards for being getting along with all different types of people. As far as junior high, that's the Girls League Award was given for somebody that wasn't in so specialized in a clique that we had. I guess I found myself in many different circles and with many different interests. But I really paid attention to your the suggestion that I'm a hard to type social 6. And so I don't exactly know what to do with what I would really like because I'm elderly, I would really like to finish the business that I came here to finish, this particular incarnation or whatever, one life or none, more. So that's what I'm a little confused about how I can best work with this. If I indeed show up as a social 6, but I have the Tritype 592, I'm not sure what to do from now on and how to achieve my goal of trying to see what I can do about finishing up unfinished business.
Well, you have to go into the defense strategy. I mean, 9s are often rewarded for getting along with a lot of people. And the social 9, even if they're introverted, they tend to be more extroverted, can look like a 5. So I would suggest being open to the fact, even if you got those 7 messages, if you got the one that says 6 and or 9, it just means 6 and 9 are usually in your Tritype. So either the 9 is in the lead or you have 6 instead of 5. So that's what you need to look at.
I think I'm a head type. That would be my usual. I might react emotionally, but I don't act. I mean, I might have a sensation or reaction somatically or emotionally, but my activity is governed by thought. When I would actually put something into action, it would be because I've thought about it.
Well, 9s can do that too, especially the intellectual 9. So I'm not saying you are a 9. It's just 9s are rewarded for this getting along with a lot of people. Now, social can often get along with a lot of people. And if you're a 6 with 9 in the Tritype, generally you're going to be out of.
Should I take the in and see if I do something different? But I feel out of different situations.
Take it again. But make sure you're choosing a card based on the archetype of the card, that you have to take the whole feeling of the card, not pick and choose words. Now, I deliberately set up some scenarios where it would kick the 6s off of 4, or I did do a lot of that because you just have.
I'm 4.
But take it again. And 2 and social is by far and away very focused on people. 9 and social is. But 5 and social is you're going to find a way to control when you're in the group and when you're not. You're going to want to be a part of the things.
I'm kind of protective of my time. When I love to be out and about if I could be, but I have to have a balancing amount of time by myself.
Yeah.
But I do think my approach to life is mainly my defense strategies are mainly mental, I think.
So the defense strategy of isolation is what you use,
I have done that in the past.
but do you do it every day to some degree?
Well, I am alone every day because I'm homebound, and
Well, but don't go to situations.
I think being alone till I didn't.
Okay, but think of 5, 10, 15.
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, I always found a way to find some time by myself, no matter if I was in a retreat with 100 people. And I would participate and have some interest in group activities. I've even led groups, but I don't seek that out particularly. But I have some ways of manipulating that a little bit sometimes. If I don't like the subject, I have enough skill to be able to turn it around so I can get something that I feel is more interesting or important or whatever. I'm a little sneaky that way, I think. Sorry.
Well, that's your 2 in the Tritype. 2s are very clever that way. We all manipulate, all 9 types, but how do we manipulate? And 2s just do it the best. So if you have 2 in the Tritype, you've figured out better what people want. Yeah, but if it's there at all, it's your heart type. So I would just propose that the intellectual 9 and the 5, when you have both in the Tritype, it can be hard to discern. So you have to look at the defense strategy of the 3 together.
Okay, so that's where I should begin. And then maybe consider at another time this idea that perhaps I have a lot in relationship to a 6. There are some things I could claim there. There's some things I could with an 8, because I can step up if I see something that needs defending, particularly if it doesn't have anything to do with myself, but for others. I have that protector a little bit. Times in my life I have gone there, but it isn't every day.
Well, without seeing, if I could see your face, I could tell you a lot more because I could read the micro expressions and the archetype and a lot of things.
I do have an impressive face, so I might be a 6, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, because the 6 has developed these muscles because they're thinking, what?
Wrinkles up there on my forehead, which make me think that I have been doing something with my forehead that might have to do with my eyes,
Well, I mean, there is a 5 that can go into panic. And so they might have developed those expressions, but they're generally avoidant people. And that's the defense strategy of 5. You cannot have the intrusion of someone even near you at times because it's in the way of your thinking that you have to be alone to think.
I'm probably a 6.
Okay, well then that's what I would consider that you're the smart.
And I plan to avoid a suffering. So I know that's been a hand that comes naturally to me. I can think ahead and see where there might be some issues or problems, and I don't make a big deal about it, but I travel heavy. I have everything I need. There's reasons for that. But anyway, yeah. So I
do as well. Ask Spencer.
And that I can anticipate problems. In fact, I think I annoyed a person I worked with because I could see some of the outcomes of things as being a little bit of a problem. And they didn't want to hear anything about that. They wanted the real positive spin on everything.
Yeah, so that can be.
I mean, I've been hearing 6 the whole time, if I'm being honest. So but that was just my, and the key thing to just really pay attention to, a lot of the times when you were like, yeah, but you would focus on behaviors. Because keep in mind, introverts also just like having their own time, and that's not any correlation with Enneagram type. So it's the idea of why. Whenever you're confused, why? What emotional element is it taking care of? What is motivating the desire? Like when my mom said, like, the reason that 5 isolates and gets that time away, and then that's when you made the connection that you're probably 6. Like the shortcut always is, why am I doing this? Because anyone can, I need my own time sometimes too, and I don't have 5 whatsoever. I'm the most social person I can think of, really. But I sometimes just need to just do my thing. So the why and the dichotomy that bounce around, I can do this, but I can do this. I heard it depends, even though you didn't say
Yeah,
it depends.
depends. And I always
Yeah.
have trouble with this because it's
Yeah.
as your mom said, situational.
Yep. And I just want to throw out there, it depends is a classic 6 phrase. A classic 6 question is what if? A classic 6 phrase is, well, it depends. I'm married to a 6, and man, I try to get her to commit to a TV show sometimes, and she just won't want to. And then later on, I'll show her the same show again, like I've never brought it up before, and she'll be into it. And I'll be like, why this time? She goes, well, it depends on my mood. And there's a lot of playfulness with that. So even though you say it depends, I heard that.
Yeah, but I think it helps you to understand people because you can fit in other people's shoes to some degree. Maybe it's just behavioral, maybe that deep as I'd like, but I have a sense of where other people are coming from intuitively.
Mm-hmm.
Now, empathy is a totally different thing.
Okay.
Because we're born with a certain level of empathy. Do we have the long strand or the short strand? It's called sensitivity factor. Or just like we're born with the warrior gene, which is the go into it factor. And that is to a degree biological. But then between the ages of 9 and 11, we begin to learn our impact on others. And if we have a benevolent guide, whether it's a parent or someone else, that helps us see the other perspective and how we're coming across to others without shaming us and what we can do differently, we develop the empathy that's secondary, that's based on after the ego is developed, after age 7, and you need a certain cognitive ability to look at your impact. So gut types are intuitive, head types are understanding.
That's what I would put.
And heart types are sympathetic. And again, in what order?
Probably. So thank you. I guess I still don't exactly what to do with all of this,
Well,
but
Rethink 6, unfortunately, so much of what I say has not been written down because they didn't have a chance to do research, certify with different schools of thought and have the exposure to Naranjo and Echazo. And in my case, Echazo's teachers, the ones that were authorized to teach Echazo's work, is where I learned really the most about Echazo's work. So you're not, unfortunately, I hate to write. I just do it to get the basic data out there. But I'll watch the 6 video, the 5 video, the 2 and the 9.
9 videos. Well, that would be help. But I suspect I'm a 6, but I guess I better figure out what my unfinished business is because I don't, the clock is ticking, let's put it that way. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're more than welcome, Jane.
A thrill to hear you both speak and what your relationship must have worked out to be. Very I'm sure.
I'd love to tell the story about when Spencer was 3 and he was in nursery school. Can I? Is it okay?
No, I'm so used to you putting me on blast by now. I just chuckle to myself and then I move on.
So he's in nursery school. He's 3 years old. And he just loved driving that little car.
Oh, okay. I know.
And then sometimes people would be running and they'd run in and he'd be on his course. And then they would run into him. And then the teachers would want, or instructors would want him to say he was sorry. I didn't do anything. And they pulled me in and they said, he just won't say he's sorry. And I said, wait, what's happening? And they told me, I said, well, he's not trying to hurt anybody. And he doesn't think he created it. So he doesn't understand yet that the person who has power is the one that recognizes when someone's hurt and how to help them. So they go, what? And I go, yeah, let me talk to him. And they were there. And I told them that. And he goes, oh, okay. Because he really cared about people. But then what he did is he would run. He would sort of run into people and then want to help them up and say, how are you doing? Because he
I wanted the power. I wanted to make them feel better. Just
I go, now,
ignore the first part of the story.
yeah, Spence, that isn't exactly what I meant. You lose power if you're part of creating that problem.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So at 3, we only have the cognitive ability to think simplistically. So that, thanks, Spence. You're a public figure.
It's
I've
fine,
been
yeah.
for years. Okay, so Kim.
Hi, Catherine. So my Tritype is 7 to 8. And so let me see. Then I am intimate, social, self-preserving. And my psychic reader, when she heard this, says, no, you're not 7. You are clearly 2 with a 4 wing. And you should read Helen Palmer. So my curiosity got piqued when, Catherine, you said today that Helen Palmer got something wrong.
Oh, I don't mean to imply that. It was the first book, so it was not all available. And what she learned had already modified and changed. So she could only write about what she learned, just as I only wrote about what I learned. But then she didn't change it thereafter. So like when I went to Naranjo and she said, okay, well, what did Naranjo say? And I told her about like the way the sexual 4 was much more entitled and assertive than the social 4 and the self-pres 4 and how they were different. And that reckless, he felt he'd made a mistake by putting it in self-pres 4, reckless dauntless, that it was really the sexual 4 that would throw it all away. If they felt all was lost, they would just say whatever. And then later when they realized, wait, all isn't lost, then of course the shame would show up. But you said you were 2 with a 4 wing. You can't have that.
Oh, not 4 wing, but somehow she said you're 2 and 4 or something like that. She definitely said you're definitely 2, but she also said 4. And
but see, they're opposites.
right.
The 2 is I have a lot to give. I have an abundance. And the 4 says I have only enough for me.
I see.
And I'm not going to move towards you unless you're really interesting to me. I'm not going to try and win you over, where the 2 is. But the 2, 7, 8.
7 to 8.
But
7 to 8.
the 2, 7, 8 is the archetype itself, is a very kind of hedonistic type in pursuit of what gives them pleasure. And that is if you lead with 2, not just 7. But what you have to look at is there an emotional nature? Are you trying to create rapport? Or are you just looking for people that are interesting to share an experience with? The 2 wants the rapport. The 7 is, hey, what's good now is great. If it's not good tomorrow, then it's not. And the 7 moves on. So you have to look at what you're doing. Do you have a fear of being unworthy and not enough? Or do you have a greater fear of literally missing out? And I don't mean that what's popular now, missing out, but of being trapped, limited, and inferior. That would be more 7. And you may have both in the Tritype, but you have to really look at which one's in charge. And for what it's worth, I could be wrong. I haven't seen you. I haven't met you. I haven't seen your test. But you're communicating more like a 2. And just remember that a whole lot of 2 was left out of the dissemination of the Enneagram. So very few people know all the archetypes of 2, just like they don't know all the variation within 6. In fact, 2, 6, and 8 were the most incompletely disseminated. So watch the videos again, and in your case, they're all available, 2, 7, and 8, and just see which issues you recognize. And I'm talking about the painful issues, not the behaviors. And watch the panels. Okay, anything you'd say, Spence?
No, I think that covers it. And just to reiterate, 2 and 4 are both part of the heart center. So they can't be tritypes. And since they're not next to each other, they can't be wings. So
Right.
I'm not sure what they were saying with 2 and 4. Because like Mom says, they are very different. The only thing I can really correlate between those 2 numbers is there's a desire for specialness, but like 2 wants to be the special friend. 2 wants to be really recognized for the special relationship they provide, the special things that they do for you. Whereas the 4 wants to be special because I play music this way. Other people play music that way, or I write music with this kind of motivation, where other people come, and it's a special where I want you to recognize I do things like other people, but I do it in this way. And wanting to not stand out, but be recognized for the special way that you bring something to the table. So that's the only thing I can think of in terms of what they are.
Exclusivity. You have
Yeah,
to be
so-
exclusive.
Right.
So 2, I really don't relate too much to 4, 2, but I still can't differentiate between 7 and 2. So the asterisks, I got 2 special notes, 2 asterisks, so
Which
6.
2?
Mm.
What did they say?
It just says, the whole explanation about 6, it's not really fully researched or something like that. Same 2 asterisks of the same message.
Exactly the same message?
I think so. Yeah. I should
Yeah,
look again, but I
That
think
couldn't
so.
quite happen. But if you only had 2,
Mhm.
it just means that 9 could be in there and 6. So maybe you're a 2, 6, 8. It just,
Yeah.
again, that goes into, are you needing to be the hero? That's more 2, 6, 8. Do you need to be totally free and you want other people to indulge you? Now I'm being extreme here, but that is what the defense strategy is saying to do. Yeah, why don't we do that together? Oh, you don't want to do it? Never mind, I'm going to do it anyhow. Now, a 7 can do that too, but the 7's going to plan everything, and then maybe they need to fulfill it, maybe they don't. Whereas the 2 is wanting you to want what they want, and they're going to try and talk you into it. So
Right.
a lot of times people say, I'm a 7, and then they'll have conflicts with others where they're trying to get others to do what they think is important. The 7 has no use for doing that for any length of time, but the 2 will hang in there and keep trying to persuade.
Right.
So they're the diplomats of the Enneagram, but they don't want to give up. Whereas 7s, yeah, they can't hang out in that level of emotional exchange for any
So
length of time.
as a therapist, I am so too. I'm really want to really be there all the way and have a real close relationship, emotionally intimate. But in my own personal life, I'm so 7.
Okay, so the
I'm
minute
so
you
7
say
and
that,
8, 7 and 8. Mhm.
the minute you're making a distinction
Mhm.
at work versus personal,
Mhm.
raises the possibility of 6. Because 6s are the type that say, well, I'm this way at home, I'm this way at work, I'm this way personally, I'm this way professionally. Now, your profession calls for compassion.
Right.
I've been a coach for years. Spencer's a therapist. We're not twos. We don't even have two in the tritype. But the significant piece here is, what if you had a person come in and they didn't hire you? Or what would happen if you had a client and they didn't choose to pursue? What would that feel like inside of you? And you don't need to tell me. I'm just saying, consider that. And then think about whether or not you say, whatever, and just move on. Or if you say, I wonder what I didn't say right, or I wonder why they didn't like, did I say it the wrong way?
Yeah,
Just-
I do that more. I feel unappreciated. It's like, what?
That's
They
two.
didn't see me. That's two.
two.
So you said, am I 268? You
Yeah,
think?
you're probably
I'm leaning
268.
towards that.
You could be 278, but it's something like 268 or 269.
269. Interesting. But when I got the 7 after I took your tri-type test, I felt so understood. So, oh,
I'd
now
have to
I got it.
I'd have to see your results and your adjectives.
Yeah.
I'm feeling handicapped here because I could, and this is like, now for years, I did coaching without pictures, without
Right,
video, with only my ears. So they're well trained. But what's really well trained is how people describe things according to their type and tritype.
Yeah.
And you're describing things and moving towards us the way a 2 does.
Also, there's the authority seeking that I picked up on earlier in the description that she was sharing. 6s find comfort double checking with people that they've assigned as some sort of authority in an area.
Mhm.
And you started off by saying, I type myself as this, then this other trusted person told me something different, so then I
Mhm.
started doubting it. And then so now I'm asking you guys, and also the concerns about being seen. There's just a lot of up here about like, what if, not to mention the authority seeking. So that also sounded, because there's a laissez-faire to 7, where it's very just like, like there's like that vibe.
Uh-huh. So you think I'm a 6 mainly, 6 to 8 or 6 to 9?
We don't know. But
Yeah,
the
we don't know. Yeah.
fact you're even asking us that in this type of scenario where we don't have your test and we're not doing the inquiry process means you're looking for an authority to tell you without the
Mhm.
full set of data.
Right.
And that is more like the 269, not the 268.
Oh, okay, because
So you could be a 6 or a 2, but Spencer's just making you aware of what you talked about and how your relationship to authority.
I see.
So
So
that it doesn't sound like 7.
okay, so I just go for so many different consultants. And I thought, oh, 7 does that, but maybe it's the 6.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Watch,
boy,
watch
wow.
the panel and then see.
Okay. All right, I will.
And on the 6th panel, I ended up even having people from the audience that were great on the 6th panel. So reserve
Mhm.
a confirmation until you look at those panels.
Okay, I will. Thank
All
you
right.
so much. Wow, I feel badly that I'm 6, but I will
The
check it out.
6s are wonderful.
Yeah.
They
Sixes are
see
awesome.
the other side to every situation. They
Playful,
With the
silly,
pros and
loyal, honest.
they're
Really?
funny.
Wow.
Oh gosh, see, 6s
Oh yeah.
are
This is what I was
like-
talking about earlier. Totally.
They're
There's
narrowed
the
down to
vibe.
this like,
Chucky from Rugrats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
all right.
Yeah.
Katherine, I will have a reading with you in several weeks. So,
Oh, well, that's great. I mean, that's perfect. 'cause
That'll
we
help.
can explore
Yeah.
it then. Then I'll have your test and be able to get around your super ego.
okay, great. Thank you again. Bye.
Okay,
Okay.
all right. Patrick,
Hi, I'm such a big fan and it's such an honor to meet you, Katherine. I watched the video where you typed out Spencer when he was young. So this is like so crazy that you said that this is him all grown up. He turned out so well. Look at him. This is crazy. And then, but I saw Spencer do the video like last week where you guys did it for free, and someone had like a similar type to mine with their ENFP, sexual, social, but 4, 7, 9. I was just hoping he and maybe you could explain how my type would be like that for me, if you can, please.
Wait, so the one last week, you mean the one that was from January that I released a few weeks
Yeah.
ago?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
it was only a week ago. I don't remember. So you're going to have to remind me what we did.
You guys typed out this person who was like an ENFP, and he asked the question like, do you have to like relate to all the Enneagram types, like your tri-type, and like try to integrate all the points and everything? He was that person that asked that question, and Spencer gave a really good rundown of like what his type would be with the 4 and the 9 and like the ostrich head and everything. But I was wondering how would it be instead of the 7 with the 5? If he could break that down, that'd be great.
It's an arrogant type, by the way.
Okay.
And if you're truly a 4, 5, 9, there's an arrogance of being distant. Now, it's very, very rare. I mean, really rare for a 4, 5, 9 to be an ENFP. So the first thing I would think is something's off.
Can I turn on my camera? Here, hold on. So yeah, this is me. And I do have like, wait, hold on. The angry eyebrows you always talk about for a sexual 4. I have that. And I relate to the 5W4 kind of head, because I'm always like into like physics and like science and like really weird stuff.
Why are you in physics, interested in physics?
Just because I'm trying to understand like meaning, right? I'm looking for like certainty and like my own way of meaning, and like I want to understand the universe and all that.
Hold on.
Yeah.
First thing I want to tell you is that you have the artisan archetype. Now that's a whole nother thing, but the artisan is an emotional, sensitive type. So if you're the artisan, there's a very common way in which artisans can seem like 4s, and you could have 4, but what you're saying about certainty, it's not.
About to be like, I was like, that sounds more like 6. Yeah.
It's 6. So 4, 6, 9 makes more sense with ENFP. Now you could still have a 4 with a 5 wing. And
6 could have a 5 wing too.
Can have a 5 wing. But you're not talking so far like a 4, 5, 9 ENFP. You're talking like an ENFP for sure.
Yeah. No, that's just because I hang out with a lot of 7s, and I kind of like get it from them, to be honest. I like the high energy of the ENFP. Yeah.
But ENFP is like 7. The description of ENFP and the common description of 7 are the same. Skip the description and see if you use the defense strategy of the 7. Oh, well, I mean, if you're around people and you're acting like them, that's 6 again.
Yeah, sexual, social, yeah.
Right. So you're going to be, you want that deep, authentic connection. Adding in 4 will only magnify that. And then adding in 9 would also add in that merging quality where you want to feel like one with someone. So right off the bat, I understand why you're looking for that perfect person, because you really want to connect. The thing that I would really just check in with is, first off, there's a lot of things in this world that you can look at on paper, and it doesn't go that way. Sports teams try to put players together. It looks great on paper. It doesn't work out. That kind of vibe.
The synergy doesn't work out.
Right. I would more ask yourself to check in with what you understand, what you feel safe with, because with the Enneagram, the thing that I find the most helpful about it is how it can help things that feel personal be recognized as not actually personal, right? I'm married to someone who's self-pres first. And the concept of like, let's say we're having conflict and it's late at night, right? I'm thinking to myself, we got to knock this out before we go to bed. She's going to think to herself, let's go to bed so that way we can be our best selves and pick this back up in the morning. And I could easily, of course, as the 846, who's like the most reactive type in the Enneagram, I could think who could sleep at a time like this, right? So, but if I'm able to recognize, oh, she's just trying to take care of that self-pres element, blah, 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 I can use my knowledge of what they are to make this not personal and work with it. Because you can find someone who lines up paper-wise, but they have a behavior you take very personally. Because remember, any number can do any behavior. So it's the whole concept of what you will connect to as the human, because the instinct is the security, how they're going to, what their security they're wanting, and the tritype is how they're going to achieve it. And that can show up in many different ways. I honestly never thought I would line up with a 631 self-pres. Right. I didn't know that's very structured. I'm very like, hey, let's do this 5 minutes from now. Right. But the thing is that balance really, really helps me
And be
because
complementary. Yeah.
if left to
Hey,
my own
Spencer.
devices.
Where did you learn all that? No. Okay, you can be certified.
Cool. I win. Nice.
You
So,
win. Yay.
So
Hey.
that's what I would connect to, because especially if it's the 469, right? Because then it's like you're very like connection oriented. You really just want to like know. You want to know, like that desire for certainty. 5 has a desire for knowledge.
And you're going to keep
expanding. Yeah, they're learning. Like it's the perpetual student who always stays in school and always wants to keep learning. 6 wants to know. 6 wants that certainty of like, can I depend on you? Will you be consistent?
Now,
Will you switch it
6s
up on
can
me?
stay in school if they're afraid of going out into the world.
Touche.
And
I'm
4s
swarming
can
like the
stay in
emotion.
school because they like the intellectual process and also don't want to go out into the world. So like a great way to look at it is all things being equal. What do? You're obvious. I see the sexual social. I totally agree with that.
Me too.
It's immediate. The ENFP, immediate,
Instantly, yeah.
but not 459.
Hmm.
You don't display any of the arrogance of the 459.
oh.
I said you're not coming across like a 459,
Mhm.
and that is my feedback. I can
And
be wrong or not.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be upset with you one way or I just want you to consider that you're evaluating behaviors and checklists rather than the actual defense strategies. And I appreciate that you appreciate my work. Or
I
some
do.
of it.
I love all your work. No, I stalk your work. Like I watch the Ben videos that Ben puts out, you know, your old stuff on Google. I watched all of it. I stalk your stuff. I love you. I absolutely do. You're the best 8 ever. You're so healthy. I'm so sorry, but Spencer, I love you so much, bro. You're awesome. I'm so sorry about this.
Oh, good, man. Well, believe it or not, we're talking about very emotional stuff.
Yeah.
We're talking about ourselves.
Yeah.
I get it.
Okay, but thank
And
you all.
remember when
I'll
we
stop
were
taking
talking,
time.
hang in there, Patrick, because remember when we were talking about our identity, if we've come up with this configuration, whatever it is, and someone is saying, consider this, it can be very anxiety producing and uncomfortable. So I'm sorry for triggering that in you. I really, really am. Thinking about type based on mental constructs is a great way to explain something, but it doesn't mean that it's 100% accurate. That's all I'm saying. And
One last
I'm
question.
fighting you, not telling you.
Does the tritype change like a lot or even slightly depending on the subtypes at all? No?
Well, the expression,
Yeah, the expression of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
because the instinct is governing what gets triggered. So if we are I broke rapport with you, that'd be very hard for sexual. And so I'm trying to reestablish rapport because I have no interest in what your type ultimately is. My interest is you asked, I was offering.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, though. This was amazing. I was so glad to meet you too. Okay. Thank you.
Take care, man.
Take care. Okay, so we are right at time. If there's one other question, Spence? Are
Sure.
you getting? Okay, so that would be Jody.
Thank you. I've been studying the Enneagram for about 4 years, and I just finished the year-long class with Russ and Jessica, and Katherine, you presented on that. So that was my first introduction to your work, but one of my good Enneagram friends is all about Tritype and always telling me about it, and I'm trying to understand it. So I took the test right after you presented to us, and I got a result I was going to ask you about. But while we've been on this call, I took it again and got a completely different result. And I don't know if it's because I was partly distracted, because one of the notes was that I was inconsistent with my answers. But I wanted to ask you about the first one, because I know I wasn't distracted when I did the first one, and then maybe the other one if there's time. So the first time I did it, so I
Hold on.
identify as a
Hold
one.
on, let me
Sorry.
ask you something really important.
Yeah.
When did you take the test? Because I added additional qualifiers and the first time.
It was right after you presented with us, 121:22.
Okay, all right, so it was the current version. Okay, version 8.
Yeah, so I identify as a type 1, and I feel pretty secure in that given the year-long sessions and all of the different triads I fit in, but I'm open to anything. So when I took the test the first time, it said it typed me as a 1, but gave me a tritype that didn't include 1.
What did it give you?
862. And then there's an asterisk, and it said your type isn't in your tritype. And so read, this is a special notice, but I don't know what else there was. I can't pull that up right now.
It's immediately telling you that something's very off. Either you're not a 1, because you can't be a 1 and an 8 at the same time, and you chose 1 at one point and 8 at another. So what's the type that's between 8 and 1?
Well, 9, but I've done a lot of searching about that, and I'm pretty confident that's not, because I'm pretty clear on what I need and when I need it, and how to get it. I will partake in conflict when I think it's necessary for the good of whatever it is I'm having to deal with, but it's not my favorite. So I do think I see the 9 weaning me if I identify as a 1. Because I don't shy away from conflict when it's necessary, especially if I'm if I believe strongly in what needs to be done. But I don't love to witness it, especially when I don't have control of it. But that's why I'm pretty certain I'm not an 8, because I don't thrive on conflict, and the 8 style of conflict I find a little unhealthy. 8s I found difficult because I feel like the ones that I've encountered have a stance and then argue it without really understanding the nuances, and I find that offensive. But the test I just took while we were talking, it gave me a 135, which actually is pretty in line with a lot of things I've examined about myself. But it has a bunch of special notes about consider 6 because of how inconsistent I was with
Did you
my
get
answer.
the 6 and or 9? That
Yeah, it says consider. It says consider 6 and or 9 in your tritype. Because of your inconsistency.
Well, it's more than inconsistency to get 7 messages. It means you had at least 15 qualifiers, maybe as many as 25 or 30. So what is better is to look at your adjectives that you chose to describe yourself and what your top choices were every time you were given the 3 possibilities. And the way you can quickly see those is under Enneaspread, because in the Enneaspread, it's like everything condensed. So you can quickly see, okay, my top 3 choices of my first testing, the analogous, is the column on the left. My second choice is the column on the right. And then below it are the Tritype Enneaspreads. Again, your first choice is all compared against each other on the left, your second choice is on the right, and then you were given the written word, your statements, and your core fears. And how else do I do? And then the instincts. So what instinct did you identify with?
I see myself as sexual and self-pres are pretty close, but when I really examine it, I think sexual is higher because I have that intensity. I think I can look like an 8 when I'm passionate about something, and that's the one with the sexual subtype. But my
Well, we're all pretty intense when we're passionate. So all things being equal,
Yeah.
is how you want to evaluate it. And it's noteworthy, whether you were distracted or not, that you had 3 types that were not repeated the second time. Not one type was repeated. That is noteworthy. So if you want to take it a third time,
for a tiebreaker.
but it's not even a tiebreaker. It's just an opportunity to see what, again, archetypally is true rather than at different times. And it's the 6 and the 9 that will vary with their testing. So remember I said there's 3 combinations that struggle with all testing instruments. It's because they go to their identification of what they should be, as opposed to what defense strategy they're using. Now, it's normal to go with descriptors, and that's an automatic thing. We all do that. It's perfectly normal. And many, many people are mistyped because they don't have the data to understand those nuances of type. So 1 with 862, your first one. And then when you had 135, what was your lead type? What did
1.
the top 1? So 1 is consistent, at least part of the time. So you have to go look at both tests and see if your top choices were different. Like in that first column, what type was dominant? In the second column, what type was dominant? In Tritype, first column, what type was dominant? Second column, what type is dominant? Then the statements, what type is dominant? The core fears, what type is dominant? It's giving you 6 different ways that you could have the same answer or a different answer, and a hierarchy of them. So all that is meaningful to me and people that know my test really well. It's got to match with the words you choose to describe yourself. And we have to fool the superego and find out what the mini egos have to say, because all of us have an identification that makes us feel safe, truly. And it isn't what we do, it can be what we don't do as well. It's what makes us comfortable, what makes us uncomfortable. And for what it's worth, this was an interesting dynamic, but I don't think it was an unimportant one, because it expresses the part of us, all of us, that's very sensitive to new information. And on a open forum or video like this, you can't get to your type takes more than that.
So just, sorry, I know you're at 10, but I just want to understand, on the first one where the one wasn't even in my tri-type, it still identified my type as a 1.
No, you identified.
Oh,
your
that's
type.
why it says it. So it didn't, it's just saying that's what I said.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, the type's letting you know something's wrong.
So that's,
but
I didn't know if it identified that as well, or if it was saying, okay, so that makes sense. So,
it's saying, hey, especially if you got that message 6 or 9, it's saying,
so the
something's
thing
off.
that
You have
was
one or the
really
other or
different,
both.
the thing that was very different in January than now is that my 28-year-old niece had just died, a horrible, horrible death that I had to help navigate the family through. And I just wonder if that has anything to do with the way I typed at that time.
It can.
Because,
would
I
type-
was in a really different state of mind. Probably less, well, I guess, I don't know, like when are you more your true self in devastating situations or in everyday life? But
Depends on your type. I would be the same. I've had extreme tragedies and I was the same. The way I dealt with the tragedy was
Yeah.
like, mate.
right. Well, I felt like, yeah, I mean, I took charge and navigated the whole thing, and that felt like I was in type, but I guess I'm thinking about the way that I scored on the tests, like values, like when you're looking at the cards and looking at what's important. Probably at that moment, relationships felt more important than they usually do.
That's entirely possible. And so what I would do is look at the adjectives that you chose and how
And
you answered.
which part tells me that? So I see the Enneagram
show
type.
answers. Under show answers, if you click on the tab.
Oh, I
show
see it.
Yeah. So it'll show you what words you chose, in what order, how you filled out that questionnaire, the one that I have. Shoot. I was using that long before I learned about the Enneagram.
So how does that tell, I mean, can I tell you my adjectives and you can tell me what you think of them? I mean, how does that tell me?
It tells me. So do they match? Did you choose words that a 1 chooses?
Can I tell you my adjectives?
Okay.
Conscientious, complete, loving, caring, and curious.
Okay. Conscientious, but many types can be conscientious. But if this was the first time when you were dealing with the tragedy, what did you say the second time?
Well, actually, as I did it this time, the adjectives popped up because I'd already done it on the same computer, and I just chose the same ones because they seemed to be right.
Okay.
So it's self-populated.
1s don't say they're loving. They are loving, but they don't say they're loving. So what, in both scenarios, you still would be dealing with grief. So loving could be a dominant word because of what you were facing. I'm so sorry that you have to even ever experience that type of tragedy. But all things being equal, do you use the defense strategy of 1, which is to push down your wrath, which you're feeling all the time, but since it's unacceptable, the 1s feel that visceral energy coming up, but they cut it off here. And there's almost a way in which the 1 is ready to say the thing that makes them so angry, and then they catch themselves right in here, where it looks like their jaw is like a little dislocated for a second when they're going to cut off. And that's called reaction formation. That is the defense strategy of type 1. That doing what's acceptable, right, appropriate, what someone should is paramount. Absolutely. Conscientious would be a part of that, but they usually don't say loving and caring the way you did. But obviously you were loving and caring in the last, and you said January, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, it was kind of, I mean, it was December, but it was January I took the test, but it had been, I mean, I was in deep mourning at the time.
Yeah.
And in grief. And I mean, I spent the first, 8 months managing everybody else, or
That's
8
right.
weeks, sorry, managing everybody else. And then, was able to kind of take some time for my own grief. So
Yeah.
I
Grief
don't want to
takes
take too much time. Those were kind of
of 2
questions how
years.
they were so different. So maybe I'll do it best 2 out of 3 and see what I come up
I
with.
would, because grief takes a minimum of 2 years. So if any of your choices were grief driven, they may change, but that's why you have to look at when you're 5, 10, 15, 20, like what was true all of your life. Not,
Yeah, I find the cards hard. I mean, sometimes like, I know obviously which cards are getting at which thing, but when I have to choose between like do what's right morally and what's best for everybody. I mean, there's a couple of cards that I have trouble seeing the difference. So, but I'll do it again, and I appreciate taking the time. And this has
yeah,
been,
and look at the way you stacked, and that'll be at show answers also. It shows you how you answered when I gave you 3 1 cards, 2 cards, 3 cards. I gave you 3 of each type, and you determined the order. So did that change from one type test to the next? Did you move that order around? Even if you came out, well, you didn't come out with the same answers, but was it dramatically different where you stacked your first 1 card and your second choice 1 card and your third choice 1 card? All that actually could be better dealt with in a session where we're looking at the test.
yeah.
And I have done videos, not in a while, where we're looking at people's actual tests. And then I can show you where to look. So it's a little hard if you don't have that. But what we talk about first is really important to us. And no one wants to be uncomfortable, but the type that will say it, that can be 8-ish or 1-ish, is the 9. The 9 is really the strongest type on the Enneagram, for what it's worth.
One of the things that you'd said, sorry to interrupt, I'm just remembering something. When you did our class, and it really rung home with me, it was beware of the 1 and the pointer. And then I thought, oh, I don't do that. And then like an hour later, I was doing that. And I find myself doing that quite often. And every time I kind of grab my finger and tuck it away because I'm like, oh.
Would you remember my saying that the social does that as well?
Oh, no, I don't remember. I think all I remember is you saying beware of the 1 and the pointer.
Well, one thing is I don't use the word beware.
Or something to that effect.
It's not in my vocabulary, but it is part of type 6 to think of what to beware of, just for what it's worth. I'm not saying you're 6 or whatever type you are. I'm just giving you feedback. Now, any of us can do this, but how are we doing it? Is it like this? Or is it like this? Is it like a social instinct? But what you can do is go on to Zoom, think of something you want to process, like 3 questions. You don't need to spend more than 3 minutes, but let's say 6 minutes, and just talk about it and see what your micro expressions are doing. See what language you talk about when there's no other person, just you on Zoom talking about your thoughts. And then you'll see what I see, which are the body language, the micro expressions, the word choices. I would look at the panels also. Have you?
Yeah. I've looked at your panels, I've looked at narrative panels, and I've looked at,
Well,
yeah.
with my panels, everyone was accurately typed according to the overview of all the different people I've studied with, including Naranjo and Echazo. So there are ways I type a little differently, and it doesn't mean anyone else is wrong. It's just based on a different data set. So which panel did you identify with?
With yours?
Yeah.
Oh, one.
And
Yeah.
why?
I can't remember what it was specifically at your panels. I mean, it was a year of, you know, I don't know how many different teachers we had. And every time we had a teacher, I went and read everything they did. And then I moved on to the next. So I honestly can't remember. I could probably look at my notes, but that's longer than you have to right now.
Yeah, and if, yeah, that is true. But consider looking again at, well, you have 6 types to look at: 1, 3, 5, 8, 6, and 2. Now that,
Yeah.
the 3
I
is
mean,
not
kind of
right.
intuitively, 1, 3, 5 makes a lot more sense to me and than the others do. But I can see that I can sometimes look like the 2, 6, and 8. But I don't think the motivations are the same. So
They're not. It's not just the motivation. You have to have the core fear and the defense strategy. Motivation isn't enough. Passion isn't enough. Fixation isn't enough. Your conviction, not enough. You must have the defense strategy to be that type.
you said defense strategy before, and the other thing you just said was core fear. Is that right?
Yeah, you want the what's essential is the core fears, the defense strategy, and the talk style of the type. Now, you were there when I was talking very, very quickly about the talk style, the behaviors, but it was so fast. Watch it again and see what you think now, 6 months later.
Well, you're watching me talk. I've got my pictures on. Does anything come across to you?
Yeah. Now, I wouldn't say with 100% confirmation, but it's like 9 to me. The strong, solid 9.
It's interesting because I explored that the first whole year of my exploration, and I had to move away from it. It didn't hold up, but I can look at it again. I mean, literally an entire year, that's what I was looking. I mean, I was undecided, but I was leaning that way. And, you know, with the more and more, this was about 4 years ago. But as I did more reading and more investigation and more studying, it just chipped away.
Well, the thing about the 9, the 6, and whatever heart type you relate to is that you can't find it just by reading and investigating. You have to see it in the defense strategy. And to be indecisive for a year immediately suggests 6 and 9. And then the reason why you had to move away from it is important. The 9 feels, first and foremost, their defense strategy is the degree to which they feel uncomfortable or comfortable, just for what it's worth. Now, because you've gone through trauma, you have to let in that you would be more uncomfortable in general because of tragedy. That's how trauma influences type. So it can make a very important difference in that way. It does not change your type, but it does change your comfort with a type. Literally. Anything you'd add, Spencer?
Just a couple things stood out to me. Again, this is by no means me saying one thing or another, what is or what isn't, but just in my almost 10 years of doing this, and even longer if you count when I was a kid and typing all my friends and blah, 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 blah. So you could argue up to 36 years of that. I will engage in conflict when it's necessary. When it comes to the gut types, I know 8s get painted as they seek out conflict, like ha ha ha. But it's when it's like when I see the challenge, I need to confront that, right? And there's like this there's a compelling to engage in it. 1s, when they see something is wrong, they need to point that out. They need to engage in that. 9s aren't these passive things that just let all these horrible things happen. Like eventually, like what really it is the 9 strength of I can handle, I can handle, I can handle, I can handle. I often refer to 9 as like the hibernating bear, like they can take, they can take, they can take, they can take, and eventually they go enough, and then they'll get big. But there's an absolute ability to engage with conflict. It's just like, I want to wait till I absolutely have to do this. And so when you mentioned that earlier, ones engage because they want to help. They think you're off track and they want to help you get back on track. They think they're guiding you. That's how it feels to them. And that's an important thing to jump in, not just because it's needed and I can't avoid not doing it. And 8s, you know, we do have this natural combativeness to us. If we're not aware of that, we can be that abusive type that you described early on, where we can almost kind of bully a situation because we push our agenda so hardcore. So again, not saying 9, definitely, but there's this immovable impression that I'm getting from you. This very solid, strong, like I'm good. People can lean on me. Like, I'm not going to guide people away from how they're feeling. I can take that. I can handle that. And you mentioned, like, I will engage with conflict when needed. So when we're debating just the gut types, we only have 3 options, and 2 of them will actively engage for different reasons. And the 9 will be like, only when I have to. So for those reasons, I'm picking up on 9, but I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong.
And it's not enough, this
Right.
setting.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'm not asking. I mean, I definitely have 9 energy. There's no question that I have a lot of 9 energy. I like to see all the sides and, you know, bring people in, but I really am pretty dominating about what I think is right. And I see myself as, I mean, many people see me and I see myself as the reformer and the do it right and black and white thinking. And, you know, I want to
But
bring you in.
9s have black and white thinking too, though.
Yeah.
Do you realize
I want to
that?
bring you in to do it the right way. Like, you know, like I want to bring you in and get you to buy in so you can do it the right way because I know the right way. But I mean, I'm totally open to anything. I just really want to understand the Tritype more. And, you know, 4 years of work and 1 year of an intensive class, I think I've moved up the levels of health a little bit. So it becomes a little bit more complicated as well.
True.
It does.
The more you go either direction, the harder it is.
That's why you want to look at throughout your life.
The 20s is the prime part, because that's when we're just like
Early 20s.
touche,
That's when
touche.
whatever makes us a success is our type. Whatever makes us then fail is our type. Because it's what we do well, and then it's what we overdo. But the strength of the 9 is their ability to endure. Now, all gut types are enduring, but the 9s are the most enduring, and they're holding both sides and all sides. But it's very hard to make a decision, to choose, because if you choose one thing, you're then offending someone or what have you. So their testing pattern is even more like 9 than 6 for what it's worth, because you have 6 different types. I mean, 3 very different types from the others. And that's quite common with 9. So I do invite you to take it again and then just look at your whole life. And then since you already did the words automatically, just copied it again, just what would you say when you were 18 to 22? What adjectives would you use? And that will inform you a lot.
Yeah, I think it's probably a lot softer then.
I see you as strong.
I mean, softer in the words like the ones that like caring and loving, like those are probably more a younger version of me.
And they're more
Yeah, interesting. Well, thank you. I'm sorry to have taken so much time.
no problem.
But that's kind of 9 thing to say too, isn't it?
Yeah, you don't want to take up someone's time.
Just remember, you
No.
didn't take time, we gave time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly. Yes. Well, thank you all for hanging in there, and we'll be back. And what did we just say? once a quarter, whatever that is, 3 or 4.
Once every 3 months.
Got it. All righty. Thank you all.
Thank you for this.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you both so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Happy to.
All
Yeah.
right. Bye, everybody.